Welcome to Thinking Through Scripture. Good to see ya. If you're new here, welcome. Glad you found your way in. My name's Cal. Now, if you want the full backstory on who I am and what we're trying to build in this shop, there's a watch this first video sitting right at the top of the playlist. The whole series is framed to roll out in order, one stone stacking right on top of the last one. But if you're like me, and you don't much care for folks telling you how to drive, you just stay right here. We'll give you plenty to work with. Just keep in mind, if you do happen to get turned around in the woods, that playlist is always sitting over there to help you get your bearings. Let's get into it. We've spent 3 episodes building a toolkit. We talked about worldview, about where your theology comes from and why it matters, about how arguments actually work, about evidence, burden of proof, and the moves people make that derail a conversation before it gets anywhere useful, about how to think clearly when you're scared, or grieving, or hoping real hard that a particular answer turns out to be true. We did all of that first because what we're about to do actually requires it, because we're about to ask the biggest question there is. Not, is the Bible true? Not, which religion is right? Not even, who is God? Before any of those questions can mean anything, there's a question that sits underneath all of them, one that most people have never actually stopped to sit with. Why is there anything? Not, what's the meaning of life? Not, where did I come from? Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does a universe exist at all? Why are you here? Why is anything here? That question right there is where this whole conversation has been headed, and it turns out it's not a simple one. Most people, if you ask them whether they've thought about that question, they'll say something like, "Sure, I've wondered about it," or "Yeah, I used to think about that kind of stuff." And what they mean is stepped out on the porch to let the dog out on a clear August night, looked up at the Milky Way for 10 seconds and felt a little tickle of mystery in their chest. Or they were a kid laying on a blanket in the backyard wondering where the edge of the sky was, right before somebody hollered that supper was ready and they forgot all about it. Or they were in a philosophy class in college and it showed up on a test. That's not the same as actually sitting with it. Because here's what happens when you actually sit with it. Really sit with it. Not as a puzzle to solve or a debate to win, just as a plain, honest question. Why is there something rather than nothing? The first thing you run into is this. There is no obvious answer. None. The universe didn't have to be here. There's no law that says existence is required. Nothing about the concept of nothing breaks down. Nothing is perfectly coherent. No matter, no energy, no space, no time, just nothing. That was a genuinely available option, and yet, here we are. That's the problem. Not a problem like a leaky faucet you can ignore. A problem like a crack in the foundation that everything else is sitting on. Something is here, and something being here instead of nothing demands an explanation. Now hold on. Stay right here with me for a second. Don't let your mind go grabbing for answers just to make the discomfort stop. Not yet. We talked about that in the last episode. The brain doesn't like open questions, especially ones this big, so it reaches for whatever's handy, and there are basically 2 answers most people land on without really thinking it through. The first one is, it's always been here. The universe is just eternal. No beginning, no cause, no explanation needed. It just is, always was, always will be. That sounds like it solves the problem. It doesn't. All it does is push the question back a step, because now you've got an eternal universe sitting there, and the question isn't gone, it's just wearing different clothes. Now the question is just why does an eternal universe exist rather than eternal nothing? You haven't answered anything. You've just decided the thing that exists has always existed, which still doesn't tell you why it exists. And there's another problem with this answer that we'll get into in the next episode, which is that the evidence doesn't actually support it. The universe doesn't appear to be eternal, but we'll get there in a bit. The second answer people reach for is, it came from nothing. The universe just popped into existence. No cause, no reason, just nothing one moment and everything the next. Well, maybe not everything all put together, but all of the ingredients just appeared out of thin air. No, that's not even right. Air didn't exist either. Now, I want to be straight with you about something. There are some very smart people who hold a version of this position. Serious scientists and philosophers, people who have done the work, and we're going to engage their arguments honestly because that's what we said we'd do. But at the plain common sense level, the level we're working at right now before we get into the technical details, it came from nothing has a serious problem. Nothing can't do anything. That's what nothing means. No properties, no potential, no capacity to produce anything at all. The word from implies a source, and nothing by definition isn't a source. It's the absence of sources. Saying the universe came from nothing is a lot like saying your barn built itself out of no lumber, with no tools, by nobody, for no reason, except this bar is bigger, considerably bigger. Here's the thing that I find most interesting about both of those answers. Neither one of them actually engages the question. They both just opt out of it. One says the universe has always been here, so there's nothing to explain. The other says it appeared without a cause, so there's nothing to explain. Both of them are ways of saying, I'd rather not think about this, and that's fine if the question doesn't matter. But what if it does? Think about what actually hangs on this question. If the universe has no explanation, if it's just here, uncaused, for no reason, then you are here for no reason. Not in a poetic, existential crisis kind of way, in a plain, literal way. Your existence is an accident. Your life has no built-in meaning. Your sense that some things are right and some things are wrong, that's just your neurons doing what neurons do. The love you feel for your kids, the grief when you lose somebody, the sense that some things matter more than others, all of it is just chemistry. Useful chemistry, maybe. Chemistry that helped your ancestors survive long enough to have you, but chemistry nonetheless. Now, you try telling your wife on your anniversary that your devotion to her isn't a moral choice, but just a highly efficient evolutionary secretion of dopamine. Then come back and let me know how that couch sleeps. Now, some people are okay with that. They'll tell you they've made their peace with a universe that doesn't care. And I'll take them at their word. But here's what I'd ask them. Do you actually live like that's true? When somebody wrongs you, really wrongs you, do you feel like it's just two collections of atoms bumping into each other? Or does it feel like something that shouldn't have happened? When you hold a newborn, do you feel like you're holding a temporary arrangement of matter? Or does it feel like something more than that? I'm not saying feelings are evidence. We covered that. But the gap between what a purely accidental universe implies and how every human being actually lives their life is worth paying attention to. On the other hand, if the universe does have an explanation, if something is here because of something, then we're in different territory entirely. Then existence isn't an accident. Then the question, why is there something rather than nothing, has an answer. And that answer, whatever it turns out to be, changes everything downstream of it. Just like we said back in the first episode. The load-bearing wall at the center of your worldview. Pull it out or put a bad one in, and the whole structure shifts. So that's the question on the table. Not whether you like the implications of one answer or another. We covered that too. Emotions follow the evidence. They don't lead it. Does the universe have an explanation? Does something being here instead of nothing point anywhere? Now here's something worth noticing. Most people go their whole lives without ever really sitting with that question. And it's not because they're incurious. It's not because they're lazy thinkers. It's because we live in a world that treats existence as a given. Everything around you assumes the universe is just here. The news assumes it. Your job assumes it. Your grocery list assumes it. Every conversation you have today will assume it. Nobody stops to ask why. And that's understandable. You've got things to do, bills to pay, cattle to feed, a world that keeps spinning whether you've sorted out the metaphysics or not. The hay sitting out in the field doesn't much care about your philosophical framework. But here's the catch when you never stop to ask. You just inherited the assumption that because existence is here today, it's always been here. You end up with a worldview built on a foundation you've never examined. You just inherited the assumption that because existence is here today, it's always been here. Moving on, and that unexamined assumption quietly shapes everything else you believe about meaning, about morality, about whether there's anybody out there who knows your name, all of it downstream of a question you never asked. There's a philosopher named Martin Heidegger, German fella, early 20th century. Not somebody I agree with across the board, but he got this one right. He called this the fundamental question of metaphysics. Why is there something rather than nothing? He argued it was the most basic question any human being could ask, the one that sits underneath every other question, and he noticed the same thing I'm pointing at right now. Most people never ask it, not because it doesn't matter, because it's uncomfortable. Because once you really ask it, once you actually sit with the fact that there didn't have to be anything, and yet here everything is, you can't just go back to treating existence as wallpaper. The question gets into you. And that's actually good. That discomfort is your brain doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Recognizing that something here demands an explanation, that existence isn't self-explanatory, that the fact of the universe is not a neutral fact. It's a problem that needs an answer. Now I want to introduce one more idea before we close out today, because I think it's the thing that makes this question feel manageable instead of just overwhelming. There's a distinction philosophers make between two kinds of things that are contingent and things that are necessary. A contingent thing is something that could have not existed. It exists, but it didn't have to. You are contingent. If your parents had never met, you wouldn't be here. This planet is contingent. The solar system is contingent. Everything in the observable universe appears to be contingent. It's here, but it didn't have to be. A necessary thing is something that couldn't have not existed. Something whose non-existence is actually impossible. Something that exists by its own nature rather than because something else caused it. Here's why that matters. If everything that exists is contingent, if everything is here because something else caused it to be here, then you've got a chain of causes. This caused that, which caused this, which caused that. Think of it like a logging chain hanging down out of the sky. Link A is hanging on to link B, and link B is holding on to link C. Every single link is fully dependent on the one right above it to keep from crashing into the dirt. Now, if somebody tells you, don't worry, that chain doesn't need a hook at the top because it just goes up forever, your common sense kicks in. You know that adding more dependent links to an infinite chain doesn't magically create a skyhook, it just makes a heavier chain. The whole setup has to be anchored to something that isn't itself dangling. The chain has to begin somewhere, and whatever is at the beginning of that chain, whatever started it all, can't itself be contingent. It can't be something that needed a cause, because then it would just be another link in the chain. Whatever is at the start has to be necessary, something that exists by its own nature, something that doesn't need an explanation outside itself, because it is the explanation. Now, I'm not going to tell you tonight what that necessary thing is. That's where we're headed over the next several episodes. We're going to look at the evidence carefully, apply the tools we built in our first few episodes, follow the argument where it actually leads, without grabbing the nearest comfortable answer, without letting what we want to be true drive what we're willing to consider. Just honest, careful thinking about the biggest question there is. But I'll tell you this much right now. The fact that the universe exists, the fact that something is here rather than nothing, is not a trivial observation. It is the absolute starting point of the most important conversation you will ever have. And we've just started it. Next time we're going to take this tool of contingency and press harder on it. We're going to look at what the scientific and historical evidence actually says about where the universe came from, whether it had an absolute beginning, and what happens to the "it's always been here" answer when you look at the raw data. It's going to get interesting. I suppose that's just about enough to chew on for one sitting. Thanks for stopping by. Before I let you get back to your day, I just wanted to say thank you. It really means a lot to me that you'd take the time to sit here and listen to my yapping. Time is the only thing they're not making any more of. So thank you for spending a little bit of yours with me. Do me a favor, would ya? Do the YouTube dance, hit the thumb, the subscribe button, and the little bell. It'll really help us out. And leave me a comment. Tell me what you liked, what you didn't like, what you want us to go over. Hell, tell me what you're having for dinner if you want. I want to get to know you. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care.
I don't have all the answers, never claimed to know it all. Just an old farm kid still learning, working it out with y'all.